Details emerging this morning in the murder of General Hospital actor Johnny Wachter. He was shot and killed after approaching thieves attempting to steal part of his car. For the first time, we are hearing from a witness, his close friend and co-worker, who says she held him in her arms after he was shot. In an Instagram post, she says, quote, "As I heard the shot ring into the night, Johnny forcefully tumbled back into my arms. As I grabbed for him, I shouted, 'Honey, are you okay?' And he responded, 'Nope, shot.'" She told ABC that she tied her jacket around Wachter to stop the bleeding, trying to save his life. No arrests have been made, and Los Angeles police have not yet located the suspects. An Idaho man has been convicted of murdering his ex-wife and two stepchildren. Chad Daybell, with the help of his second wife, Lori Vallow, committed the triple homicide. Prosecutors say the killings were motivated by apocalyptic spiritual beliefs. Daybell could now face the death penalty. In the NBA Finals, matchup is now set. The Dallas Mavericks advance to face the Boston Celtics. The Mavericks beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was a Game 5 blowout. The Mavericks advanced to the finals for the first time since 2011. They won the championship then. Game 1 in the NBA Finals is scheduled for like 6 months from now, honestly. It's like June 6th. It's like 10 weeks away. Because why start it soon? Why enjoy the excitement of the NBA? Let's wait. Okay?
I have nothing more to add to this. Moving on, Donald Trump telling reporters after learning he was convicted on all 34 criminal counts that, quote, "the real verdict is going to be decided on November 5th. Biden tweeting post-verdict this: "There's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box." A new NPR, PBS, NewsHour, Marist poll released yesterday suggests the verdict may not do much to sway voters. 67% of registered voters saying a guilty verdict would not make a difference in their vote. Joining me right now is CNN political commentator Karen Finney. She's also a former senior spokesperson for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and Matt Gorman, former senior advisor to Tim Scott's presidential campaign. So, Matt, let's start here. What is the smart thing politically for Donald Trump to focus in on as we are waiting to hear potentially for him to hold a press conference a little later this morning? What is the message focus you would suggest?
Yeah, I expect him obviously to talk about this verdict, but just like he did, he found ways when he was up in New York during the trial to weave in messages he wins on, right? Immigration, the migrant crisis, the economy. He has to weave those in too. At the end of the day, I think, as your poll suggests, the fundamental issues about this election are unchanged. And so keeping your eye on that, making sure he's talking about those issues is going to be very important when he has his big audience.
Karen, what is the smart thing then politically for Joe Biden to say if and when he speaks publicly about the verdict? Is there a world where you think the smartest thing to do is to say nothing, not fuel the fire?
Absolutely. I think the president should continue to do what he has been doing, which is stay focused. It can't be more dramatic. Do you trust a convicted felon with your future, or do you trust Joe Biden, who's a good, decent man who's been fighting for this country for the last 4 years? I think the contrast couldn't be more dramatic and stark. And remember, the other part of the messaging around Trump is this is one of 3 more to go. He's now been found guilty, and there are 3 more cases still out there. Do you really trust that guy with your future? I think that's the choice for voters.
Political impact. This poll, as you were just talking about, and let's dive a little bit more into it. It does suggest that it's going to have little difference on how voters feel. This is registered among registered voters. 67% said it makes no difference on their vote, a guilty verdict. 17% saying it makes them less likely to vote for Trump. 15% saying it makes them more likely to vote for Donald Trump. Do you think that those numbers shift in any significant way as the verdict sets in and the campaign continues and Donald Trump is called a criminal over and over again?
I don't foresee it. I mean, we've been doing this for 10 years essentially now, talking about, things Trump has done or said, and, nothing has shifted so far. I think so much of this is baked in, and I think it's a not insignificant amount of folks who are voting for Trump. They might not necessarily like him, and I think he's the best guy, yeah, but they want to be able to afford gas and groceries and buy a house. There's other concerns. And so I think that is kind of where I bet this surpasses it.
But again,
Okay.
Matt, wasn't it you that you just said that no matter what, both candidates are going to have enough money to run this race? Wasn't that our conversation last week? Or is that another Matt Gorman?
No, but
That was
I mean,
Matt Gorman.
Who
We were
wanted-
both here.
Who doesn't want more money? I mean, I don't know about you. I'm not going to turn money away.
Well, Matt, I don't know if you know me well,
yeah.
but less is always more for me. Carrie, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, well, I'm going to talk about the poll, Kate.
We are in an
What I would say,
upside down
I think-
world today.
I know. Well, you got me here, Kate. You got 16 election. He's still facing charges for potentially trying to overturn the 2020 election. I mean, people really have to say to themselves, am I going to vote for a convicted felon? There's two other points I'll make. We've already seen this morning. John was just talking about what was going on with former Governor Hogan, right? And that's going to be a big choice. That's going to be a real problem for the Trump campaign to try to keep that under control. And the last thing I'll say is don't forget about women voters. I've been focusing on women voters for a long time in my career. And I will tell you, many women voters who said, all right, I'm going to trust Trump in 2016, now are saying, wait a second, he did lie to us. How do I feel about that, particularly on an issue when it comes down to something as personal? He did it on his wife, and he lied about it and tried to cover it up.
If this becomes on the Larry Hogan bit, if this becomes a litmus test, what do you think of it, Matt?
Well, I think if you're Larry Hogan and you're running in a state that Biden won by 20, it actually might help you. I think that's important context to keep in mind here. I think, though, when you have everyone from, obviously my old boss, Tim Scott, Donald Trump, all the way down to Susan Collins, who voted to impeach Trump for January 6th, kind of sing from the same song sheet. I think that says a lot about where I think the Republican Party writ large feels truly about this thing.
It's great to see you guys. Thank you so much.
Take care.
The next hour of CNN News Central starts right now.
All right, everybody, welcome to our viewers all around the world. I'm Omar Jimenez, and this is CNN Newsroom. Let's go straight to our top story. We're going to begin with the word that shook the U.S. political and legal world and reverberated around the globe on Thursday. Guilty, guilty, guilty. That word, spoken 34 times as the jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial turned the ex-president into a current felon. Now, despite weeks of often damning evidence in the trial, the verdict came as a shock to many, if not everyone, though not some on his actual legal team. It is the first time, though, in history that a former president has been convicted of a crime. Now, Trump remained defiant and unbowed as he left the courthouse, vowing to appeal and saying this fight isn't over.
The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a sore respect, DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man.
So the focus now turns to what kind of sentence Trump might get. The judge has scheduled sentencing for July 11th, and legal experts say anything from probation to a prison term is possible. Now, CNN spoke to Trump's lead attorney, Todd Blanche. He made it clear he sees no way his client should face a prison cell for a crime like this.
Never face a jail sentence based on this conduct. Other 77-year-old first-time offenders would never be sent to prison.
Now, we're going to be covering this history, really, making verdict from many angles this hour. And we begin with CNN's Kristen Holmes, who's outside Trump Tower this morning. All right, Kristen, we expect Donald Trump to speak in the coming hours. I don't want to put you in the position of predicting what he is going to say, because that's, maybe a tough job in many respects. But give us a sense, at the least, of what we should expect.
Omar, well, first of all, I never exactly estimate what Donald Trump was going to say because, as you said, he's often off teleprompter and often talking about things that have nothing to do with the current state of affairs. However, When I talked to his senior advisors, they say that he is going to continue his messaging that he has done since before this trial even started, calling this election interference, saying that this process was already rigged, and saying it's political persecution. They believe that that helps them in November continue to rile up the base, but not just the base. Some of those Republicans who are sitting on the sidelines, unsure of what to do, looking for an alternative to Donald Trump, they actually believe that this conviction could help with them too. Now, to be very clear, this is an election that is going to be decided by a very narrow margin, and the real answer is that no one knows how a conviction is actually going to play out with voters, but this is what his senior advisors are hoping and what they say they believe is likely to happen. Now, the former president himself, we heard some of this yesterday, he was outraged, he was surprised when that verdict came in. We actually saw almost the oxygen coming out of the room through our court reporters who said everybody was ready to leave. Donald Trump was laughing, he was hitting his lawyer, they were chatting back and forth, and then all of a sudden those words, "We have a verdict," really took out the oxygen of the room. Now, by the end of the night, sources around Donald Trump say that he was in better spirits. He was contacted by a number of allies, by donors, saying they stood by him, saying they were going to donate hefty sums to him. Of course, we have seen this in the past when these kind of legal issues have actually given Donald Trump a boost financially. We are still waiting to see those numbers. And again, we're still waiting to see Donald Trump today. We have a lot of questions. Whether or not he takes them still remains to be seen. They haven't given us any guidance on that. The other big question is Melania Trump. We know that she is here in New York, despite the fact that she never went to one day of his criminal hush money trial. The big question for us now is whether or not she'll at Trump Tower when he walks up to that podium to speak to reporters, really for the first time in a press conference setting since that verdict came down.
And Kristen, look, obviously people across the world were watching in when this verdict actually came. You were actually at Trump Tower, outside Trump Tower. What has the atmosphere been like this morning? But also, what has the atmosphere been like since this verdict actually came down on the actual streets of New York, if not for the supporters of the president or otherwise?
Yeah, well, we've seen a couple of people who are here just to say that they're happy that this verdict came down, that they're excited. They were coming here to kind of just stand around Trump Tower. We've also seen people who are here to support the former president, but neither in big groups. I think the most surprising thing to me is that we are on the street in New York in front of Trump Tower, and New Yorkers are just living their day-to-day lives. But I can tell you inside of Trump Tower right now, those advisors, Donald Trump himself, they are all strategizing about how to make this work in their favor, if they can, ahead of November. That is where the concentration is. And I know you mentioned the sentencing date. That is actually very critical. July 11th is just days before Donald Trump is set to go to the Republican convention. That is also when he is set to be the official Republican nominee. We talk a lot about how historical this was because of the fact that he is the first former president to be convicted. It is also historic because he is the first current presidential nominee of a party to be convicted. So how, again, this plays out in November, that's the big question. That's what you're going to see both him and his team really focusing on in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, we've used the term unprecedented with Donald Trump a lot, but truly, maybe no truer sense of the word with some of the dynamics that you just laid out there, and the dynamics we'll see this summer as well. Kristen Holmes, outside Trump Tower, really appreciate it. Now, following the verdict, Trump and his legal team said they would appeal what the former president called a rigged trial. Now, the judge told the defense that it has about 2 weeks to make motions to the court regarding sentencing and other matters. And Trump's lawyer says this fight is only getting started.
We have motions due in a couple weeks in front of Judge Merchan, which we're going to vigorously fight and restate a lot of what I'm saying to you tonight and other things that happened during the trial that we think just made the trial unfair, including the testimony of Ms. Daniels. If that is not successful, then as soon as we can appeal, we will.
So are there good grounds for an appeal? Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Janet Johnson. Let's start there. We can assume, as we've seen elements of, they're going to appeal here, which Trump has consistently done with court rulings against him. But this was a case brought by a grand jury. The selected jury was unanimous over 34 counts, despite an imperfect star witness in Michael Cohen. What are the real chances of an appeal actually working here?
Yeah, good morning. Generally not good. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, I'll go to trial, and if it's a conviction, I'll overturn it on appeal, and that rarely works. I see really just two issues. One is actually the aggravator, the felony that was created because there had to be another crime that this was in furtherance of, not that it was completed, but the attempt. And they had an option of 3 different crimes, and the jury could pick any one of the 3, and they didn't even have to agree unanimously on which one was the predicate crime. So I do think that that might be, there's some case law that is on both sides of that issue. That's probably their strongest issue. The other thing is that their expert was essentially not allowed to testify. The defense had somebody who's going to talk about elections and whether this actually was in furtherance of trying to influence an election. And that person was limited on what they could say. And then ultimately the defense said, we're not going to call them. I don't know if the defense proffered that testimony. If they didn't, then they've waived that. But if they did, that may be another issue. But Judge Marchand has a lot of latitude in what he allows in and out. And it really has to, be an outrageous mistake to be overturned. So Stormy Daniels' testimony, those things, that is not going to be grounds for an appeal.
And obviously, look, right now his sentencing for this verdict is scheduled for July 11th. Could appeal efforts affect that sentencing date?
No, the appeal actually wouldn't start until after the sentencing. Right now, he's actually technically not convicted. He's guilty, but the judge hasn't adjudicated him, hasn't convicted him. So that won't affect it. But is it unusual for sentencing date to be pushed back because the defense or either party says, look, we have to get witnesses, we have to get, psychologists to testify, we have to, get the pre-sentence investigation report. That date is, while it's firm, they have been continued. I personally have sentences continued all the time, but it just pushes it closer to November. So it doesn't necessarily help Trump in terms of a political, gamut, but, July 11th may not be the date. And after that, then the appeals would start.
One of the things that Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg said after the charges, after the jury decision was announced, was calling Trump a defendant unlike any other in American history. I think that's fair, given the fact that we've never had a former president prosecuted in this way, much less convicted in this way. Now, does that actually make a difference in how, one, I guess, sentencing is considered, but also how did that maybe in some ways change how this case needed to be tried, adjudicated? Just how did that dynamic change what we saw play out over the course of this trial?
Right, that's a great question. I think he is a different defendant, but I don't think Judge Marchand treated him differently at all. And I think that's going to be an issue in sentencing. Judge Marchand is going to look at how are similarly situated defendants treated? How have I sentenced them? How has his behavior been an aggravator or a mitigator? Remember, he had 10 contempt charges upheld against him. He did not behave like a model defendant, and he's still continuing to behave sort of in an outrageous way if he was compared to any other defendant. So I actually think in the courtroom, the politics, the idea that he's a former president, that he's a candidate for president, that is actually not played into it. And I suspect if they talk to the jurors, they will say that they listened to the instructions that the judge gave them and they put that aside. Any prejudice, any bias, any sympathy, that was not part of their verdict. That is part of their oath. And I think these jurors followed to the T every instruction that they were given. The fact that he is Donald Trump, he was just a defendant in that courtroom, and he will be that at sentencing.
All right. Janet Johnson, criminal defense attorney, really appreciate you taking the time and perspective. A lot to talk about here. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, there's also been a tsunami of reaction to this historic verdict. The Biden campaign wasted no time slamming the former president, saying, quote, "There's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box." Meanwhile, 2 officials tell CNN that Biden aides in the West Wing were transfixed as Thursday's verdict came in. And for his part, President Biden remained out of the public eye at his home in Delaware, where he honored the memory of his son, Beau, on the 9th anniversary of his death. Let's go live to Washington and CNN's Priscilla Alvarez. Now, Priscilla, what else are you hearing from the campaign about?
It's been, of course, a central theme of the Biden campaign, and all of this was reflected in a statement by the Biden campaign that came out shortly after the verdict was reached, where they said, quote, "Convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president." Now, they also used the opportunity to fundraise, essentially telling their supporters that this Trump conviction could fire up his supporters and his fundraising. So a text went out to folks from the president saying, I hate to ask, but there couldn't be a more important time for you to make your first donation to keep this guy out of the White House once and for all. So as you can see, they're trying to use this to fire up their own supporters and their own base, but they're being very careful about how they seize on it, because they do think that the issues of this election will ultimately be more prominent. Now, of course, the White House has been generally reluctant to weigh in over the course of the trial, and we did get a statement from the White House counsel spokesperson last night who said, quote, "We respect the rule of law and have no additional comments." So we're not anticipating hearing much more from the White House. And as you mentioned there earlier, the president was really out of the public eye yesterday, commemorating the 9th anniversary of the death of his son, Beau. He will be returning to the White House this morning, where he does have a few events, including celebrating the Kansas City Chiefs. That is usually a lighthearted event, but you can imagine that he will be asked about this by reporters, and we'll see whether or not he decides to weigh in. Of course, this is something that the White House had been considering, whether or not he would give remarks. The logistics, of course, a little bit complicated and uncertain, but all eyes will be on the president. What, if anything, he has to say on this today? Omar?
Yeah, we will keep an eye out for it all. Priscilla Alvarez, thank you so much. Meanwhile, internationally, reaction to Trump's verdict is also starting to come in. The Kremlin spokesman says, quote, "It's obvious political rivals are being eliminated through all legal and illegal means," while Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is a fan of Trump, is urging Trump to, quote, "keep on fighting." I want to bring in CNN's Nada Bashir, who joins us now live from London. So, Nada, look, we're hearing from Hungary's Orban. How are other world leaders and politicians reacting so far to this news?
Well, look, the news came in quite late last night in the United Kingdom and across Europe, Omar. This has already taken the place of some of the front pages, particularly here in key headline, most newspapers going with Trump guilty. But as you mentioned, we are beginning to see a reaction from world leaders here in Europe, particularly in those nations where there is a significant far-right political presence. You mentioned, of course, the reaction from Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who said, "I've known President Trump to be a man of honor," again referring to the upcoming US election, saying that the people make their verdict in November. We've also heard from Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. He said earlier today, describing this as judicial harassment, again saying that Italy is familiar with, in his words, the weaponization of the judicial system by the left, who he said have for some time tried to eliminate political opponents through legal means. And again, that reaction from the Kremlin in Russia, voicing tacit support and encouragement for the former US President Donald Trump. Now, when it comes to allied nations, we haven't seen that outpouring of reaction, and a delicate topic for many of those allied nations and allied political leaders, particularly considering, of course, that this is an election year in the United States. That question was put to Germany's Foreign Office spokesman earlier this morning. He declined to comment, but we will be keeping an eye on any further reaction from leaders in Europe and the United Kingdom throughout the day. Omar?
Yeah, Nada Bashir, thank you for taking us through those reactions. Really appreciate it. Still to come, it's been a moment like no other, and as Nada just took us through, the world's reacting to America's new political reality. A former U.S. president, now a convicted felon. We're going to take you through what it means just ahead. We're also going to take a look at what's ahead for the former president. A date has been set for his sentencing. He also faces more legal troubles. We're going to have all that and more in a live report ahead. Welcome back. Let's get back now to our top story and what is now an unprecedented moment in American history. For the first time ever, a former U.S. president is a convicted felon. Now, Donald Trump was found guilty on Thursday on all 34 charges of falsifying business records with the intent to commit, aid, or conceal another crime. Now, his sentencing is scheduled for July 11th. Trump is calling his hush money trial, maybe unsurprisingly, rigged, with his team vowing to appeal. And while that trial may have been the first, it's certainly not the last of Donald Trump's legal troubles. Now, the presumptive U.S. Republican presidential nominee has been indicted in 3 other criminal cases. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis charged Trump and 18 others in connection with their attempts to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. Trump is also facing charges in 2 federal cases that were brought by special counsel Jack Smith, including conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and illegally retaining classified documents. CNN's Caitlin Polantz joins me live from Washington. She's been legal proceedings, which they are very detailed and intricate at times. So, Caitlin, just bring us up to speed, keep us on track about all of these other potential trials, at the very least, indictments and cases right now.
Yeah, Omar, there is before the election. I'm not going to rule that out. We just don't know. Let's go one by one, though. The case in Florida, the classified documents case, that's the federal charges against Donald Trump for mishandling legal arguments that Donald Trump's team has put before her. She has hearings scheduled until the end of July. No trial date, but the big thing that she's going to have to tackle in that case going forward is how classified documents could be used at trial. That's going to take a lot of time and attention in a secret room where the judge goes document by document with the defense and prosecutors on what can they show the jury. So that's where that stands. The 2 January 6 cases against Donald Trump, the state case in Georgia and then the federal case in Washington, D.C., are a big question mark. The case in Georgia, a state case, that's moving very slowly because there are some big legal issues on appeal, such as whether Fani Willis, the district attorney, can remain on that case. Let's take a moment. I'll come back to that in a second. The big question, though, hanging over that and the federal case in Washington, D.C., that is related to presidential immunity. We're waiting for the end of this month. Depending on what the Supreme Court does here, there is a path for that to potentially go to trial unless they give Trump so much protection because of him serving at the presidency at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. If they give him so much protection, he can't go to trial. That's also a possibility. Once that is all sorted out, then things may be able to pick up again in the Georgia case as well. Immunity questions, federal questions, constitutional questions, classified
play out as well. So there's a lot to factor in here. Caitlin Polantz, you're going to be busy this year, and I can't wait to have you back. All right, everyone. Still to come, the date is set for the sentencing of the former president, Donald Trump. It's just days before the Republican National Convention. We're going to have details in a live report ahead. Plus, will the Trump verdict move the needle at all in terms of his support? We're going to have more on that straight ahead.